The low, steady rumble of a Macedonian phalanx is a sound that once shook the foundations of the known world. It is the sound of thousands of boots hitting the dust in perfect unison, the rhythmic clatter of 18-foot pikes, the sarissas, carried by men who had been transformed from simple farmers into the most lethal military machine in history. At the center of this storm stood a young man, barely out of his teens, who believed he was destined for nothing less than the dominion of the earth. To understand Alexander, one must understand that he was not merely a king, but a collision of two worlds: the cold, calculated military genius of his father, Philip II, and the fiery mystical conviction of his mother, Olympias. In the year 356 BC, in the small, rugged kingdom of Macedonia, the air was thick with the scent of pine and the promise of blood. Macedonia was a frontier state, viewed by the refined city-states of Athens and Thebes as a land of uncouth barbarians. But Philip II had changed the game. He had reorganized the infantry and perfected the hammer and anvil tactic, using his heavy cavalry to deliver the decisive blow while the infantry held the line. Alexander grew up in this atmosphere of constant preparation. He watched his father unite the fractious Greeks through a combination of brilliant diplomacy and brutal force. He was a child of the barracks, yet his education was far from primitive. When Alexander turned 13, his father sought the finest mind in the Greek world to sharpen his son's intellect. He chose Aristotle. For 3 years, in the quiet groves of Nysa, the man who would conquer the world sat at the feet of the man who had categorized it. Aristotle did not just teach Alexander science and medicine. He taught him that the universe was governed by logic and that human reason could master any obstacle. He gave Alexander a copy of the Iliad, which the boy would carry with him to the ends of the earth. He saw himself as a new Achilles, a hero of old stepping into a modern, cynical age. This sense of destiny was first glimpsed by the public in the taming of Bucephalus. A horse merchant had brought a massive black stallion to the court, but the animal was so wild that no one could mount it. Philip was ready to send it away in disgust. But the young Alexander had noticed something others had missed. The horse was not angry. It was terrified of its own shadow. By simply turning the beast toward the sun so its shadow fell behind it, Alexander calmed the animal and rode it. It was a masterclass in observation and psychological control traits that would later allow him to dismantle empires. In 336 BC, the world shifted. Philip was assassinated at a wedding feast, and at just 20 years old, Alexander became king. The Greek city-states, sensing weakness, rose in rebellion. They thought they were dealing with a boy. They were wrong. Alexander descended upon Greece with such speed that the rebellion collapsed before it could truly begin. To ensure no one would doubt his resolve, he razed the city of Thebes to the ground, sparing only the house of the poet Pindar. It was a calculated act of terror that secured his rear before he turned his gaze toward the ultimate prize, the Persian Empire. In the spring of 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont into Asia. He was the first to leap onto the shore, flinging his spear into the sand to claim the continent as won by the spear. He did not have a massive navy or an endless supply of gold. What he had was a corps of Macedonian veterans and a tactical brilliance that bordered on the supernatural. At the Granicus River, he faced his first major Persian force. The Persians held the high ground on the opposite bank, yet Alexander led a daring charge across the water. He was nearly killed. A Persian axe actually split his helmet before his friend Cletus the Black saved him. The victory at Granicus was the crack in the dam. As he moved down the coast of Asia Minor, Alexander became a master of psychological warfare. In the city of Gordium, he encountered the legendary Gordian knot. It was said that whoever could untie it would rule all of Asia. Alexander didn't spend hours fumbling with the rope. He drew his sword and sliced through it. It was a message to the world. He would not play by the old rules. He would forge his own. The first true test of kings came at the Battle of Issus. Here, for the first time, Alexander faced the great king of Persia, Darius III. The Persian army was a vast multi-ethnic host that vastly outnumbered the Macedonians. But the terrain was narrow, hemmed in by the mountains and the sea, which neutralized Darius's numerical advantage. Alexander identified the Persian center, where Darius sat in his chariot and led a direct lightning-fast cavalry charge. Darius, seeing the young king closing in, panicked and fled the field. The Persian army collapsed in his wake. Alexander had captured the great king's treasury and his family, but he had not yet captured the empire. Instead of chasing Darius into the heart of Persia, Alexander moved south into Egypt. The Egyptians, who had long chafed under Persian rule, welcomed him as a liberator and a living god. They crowned him pharaoh. It was here, in the silence of the western desert, that Alexander made a pilgrimage to the Oracle of Ammon at the Siwa oasis. What the oracle told him remains a mystery, but he emerged with a new, divine aura. He founded the city of Alexandria, a beacon of Greek culture on the edge of the African continent that would house the greatest library the world had ever known. By 331 BC, the final confrontation was inevitable. On the dusty plains of Gaugamela, Darius had assembled every soldier, every chariot, and every war elephant he could muster. He had even leveled the ground to ensure his chariots could move freely. It was a sea of humanity against a small, iron-disciplined phalanx. Alexander waited, observing the Persian lines until he saw a slight opening. He struck like a dagger. The Macedonian cavalry shattered the Persian line, and once again, Darius was forced to flee. The Persian Empire was effectively dead. Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis fell into Alexander's hands. In a moment of symbolic finality, he burned the great palace of Persepolis, some say in a drunken rage. Others say as a calculated act of revenge for the Persian invasion of Greece a century earlier. But Alexander could not stop. The horizon kept calling. He pushed his men into the rugged mountains of Central Asia, fighting a brutal guerrilla war against local chieftains. He married the Bactrian princess Roxana, attempting to blend the cultures of East and West. He began to dress in Persian robes and demanded that his men practice proskinesis, the act of bowing before him. This caused a deep rift. His Macedonian veterans felt their king was becoming a foreign tyrant. The campaign finally reached the Indian subcontinent. At the Battle of the Hydaspes, Alexander faced King Porus and a terrifying new weapon, 200 war elephants. The monsoon rains were torrential, and the river was swollen. Yet Alexander executed a brilliant night crossing and defeated Porus. Out of respect for the Indian king's bravery, Alexander allowed him to remain as a satrap, but the end was near. At the Hyphasis River, his men reached their breaking point. They had marched 11,000 miles. They were tired, homesick, and terrified of the even larger empires rumored to lie further east. They mutinied. For the first time in his life, Alexander was forced to retreat. The march back through the Gedrosian desert was a catastrophe of heat and thirst, a hollow end to a decade of glory. In June 323 BC, in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar II in Babylon, the fire finally went out. Alexander was 32. Whether he died of malaria, exhaustion, or poison is a debate that will never be settled. As he lay dying, his generals asked who should inherit his vast empire. His final words were, "To the strongest." The empire did not last. It was carved up by his generals, who spent decades fighting over the pieces. But the world had changed forever. The Greek language became the lingua franca of the East, and the seeds of the Hellenistic age were sown from the Mediterranean to the Himalayas. Alexander had lived a life of such intensity that he burned out like a comet, but the trail of light he left behind would illuminate the course of history for 1,000 years. He was a man who dared to treat the world as his map and the gods as his peers, leaving behind a legacy that remains as vast and complicated as the lands he conquered.